hear me? Okay, so one time I had to make a presentation, and that was a lot of pressure, because it was first of all, I want to thank Paula and Terry for inviting me. Terry, because how I met Paula was through the Reliability Web IMC conference, and we got an award, and then Paula invited us, and I want to thank her for setting me up for the 2 o'clock presentation, because I had to make a presentation one time. You talk about pressure, it was at 4 o'clock. Guess what was happening at 5 o'clock?
Beer.
Happy hour. I'm the only one standing between the audience and them going to happy hour. That's pressure. Okay, so I got to figure out how to make this go. Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story, and that's the outline of my story. I'm going to tell you who we are, and I'm going to tell you a little about how we got to where we're at. And it is kind of a Cinderella story, because you'll see from my little picture there, we're out in the middle of nowhere. And we are owned by U.S. Sugar, but we're a very small company. So when we got this award, we saw that as a major accomplishment, kind of a Cinderella story, because we got the golden shoes because we're competing against bigger companies. We make orange juice. We are south of here in Clewiston. If you look at the map of Florida, you'll see a big lake. We're right at the bottom of that lake, halfway between Fort Myers and Clewiston. West Palm. Most of us live on the coast, drive 30 to 50, 55 miles to work every day. When we started the plant, it was built, the official grand opening was in '94. I started there in October '93. It was going to be a concentrate plant, and after a year and a half, the guy that started the plant, the engineer, he retired, got an operations guy in there. We went to NFC. We have 56 1 million gallon tanks to store orange juice, process a bunch of oranges. At our heyday, it's 22 million boxes. We still get 1,000 trucks. Now we're at, and that's part of the story, is why we had to go through this change. And there's our, what drives a lot of what we do is our mission statement. We've had that for 24 years now. So when the new boss came in, the old boss was an engineer. He thought he designed the perfect plant. It was those idiots in operations couldn't run it, and that's a quote, I'm not exaggerating that. So we got an operations guy in there. He worked for Tropicana. He did a lot of benchmarking as part of they go out and benchmark organizations and different consultants, and he learned all the buzzwords, and he was good at the buzzwords. And he knew what needed to be done, he just wasn't an implementer. And so so he gave us a culture of process. Everything needs to be a process, and everything needs to be moved down the continuum. So he knew that we would be prepared for anything that happened if we moved down that continuum. So we started in 2000. Of course, in the early years, I was working 80 hours a week. So about 2000, I was getting tired of being in operations. There was only 2 of us that knew how to make orange juice. And so it was very exhausting. So in 2000, we also are in the food industry. Are any pharmaceutical people here? Any food people here? Okay, we are regulated, just like I know there's a lot of nuclear people here, and we are really regulated by DEP and food and everything else. So our customers wanted us to start having outside third parties audit us. So we first started with ISO 9002, 2000, and then we went to AAB, and now we're into FFSC. So talk about change. Every time that happened, they focused on different things. And so they wanted an improvement system. And that improvement system actually led to some of our problems, because we would develop these improvements, and one of the things that my boss wanted to do was have teams. He was big into teams. So somewhere in that time, about 2000, he said, "Do you want to be the guru for maintenance?" So I said, "Sure, why not?" but we were still on the teams, and the teams were, we were actually building silos in retrospect. They were self-sufficient. They got to do whatever they wanted, and they did the maintenance, they did the improvements and everything else. Start going to a lot of maintenance conferences, and went to my boss and said, we need to centralize maintenance. And he, was against that because he wanted to keep the team structure, and I finally convinced him that was the right thing to do. He asked me if I wanted to take over maintenance. And so, take over as a centralized department. And I said, as long as I have engineering, I will do it. Because one of the problems I saw was that if I was going to be responsible for controlling the cost of the maintenance, I needed to start controlling the cost of the projects, because guess what? The projects weren't getting completed. How did you complete it? On the expense budget. How am I going to control that? So I said, yes, we'll do that. Then about 2007, we started talking about going to SAP. So we have to start process mapping. And the whole time we're in there process mapping, I said, okay, we need to have a change of design process, because you'll see all the problems that I'll state of why we needed a change of design process. So we, didn't get too much that way with the consultants. So eventually, our little group figured out how to come up with a change of design process. We eventually changed the name to MOC. Does anybody have any refrigeration? Is anybody under PSM? Process Safety Management? Okay, so a couple of you know what I'm talking about. If you have one of the 137 chemicals that are hazardous and you have a certain amount of it, you have to be under PSM. And Process Safety Management has 14 steps. One of the steps is a management of change process. But we were only focusing on that on anything that affected the refrigeration system. So we eventually said, let's just have one process, because we use a form. Let's call it all management change. If it has to do with ammonia, we go ahead and use the long form. If not, we use the short form. The other thing we incorporated, one of the problems is you got capital projects, but we also have expense projects. We incorporated into this change process every project, every. So every project we investigate, we go through the same process. We implement, or we actually close out over 200 projects a year, and there's only 3 of us. And of course, I'm only part-time because I got other things I got to worry about too. I'm also over utilities, and I'm also over material services. So we get like anywhere from 200 to 300 different suggestions every day. So the good old days. The fallacy in the improvement report system we set up is, as I said, we built these silos, and they got to make their decisions of what they wanted to do. And guess what their justification was for that? It feels good. I think it'll work. This is what I want to do. So there was no collaboration. You heard about collaboration from the first 2 speakers already. No collaboration, no thought, a lot of rework. There's just not a lot of structure to it. No defined scope. No, we didn't have a history of why we did these things. And then as soon as we changed every year or every 2 years, we changed supervisors. Guess what? We undo what they did and put back the old system. So a lot of spent money and stuff like that. Now, the plant was built the way the orange juice. I think Paula was the one, or one of the speakers said, you got to be resistant to change. You can't be resistant to change. Change is going to happen. You talk about an industry that is resistant to change is orange juice. They have been doing citrus the same way. We go like every 25 years, the industry will say, we can change this a little bit. So very, very non-changing. It's run oranges, run oranges. We're running 22,000. Run them as fast as you can. Don't stop for anything. Well, guess what? We are hit with we've had a lot of diseases, and lately the biggest disease is greening. Greening is killing the trees. We went from a crop of 250 million boxes in Florida, we're down to about 60, 70 million boxes, 60 million boxes. And guess what? We were about to, our company leads the industry in trying to come up with technology and patents to solve the problem. We thought we were going to be in the upswing this year. Guess what? Irma knocked our poor crop in half. We dropped down to about 40 million boxes this year. But we were prepared, and we were prepared when the plants start closing or not running as much, because we start going down this continuum of preparing for change and responding to change. I've been doing this for 33 years. When I started in '85, there were 37 plants. There's less than 10. I say less than 10 because there's still more to be that may be closing. I got two examples of the projects. One, my office right outside, somebody came up with this idea that we're putting oil meaning citrus oil, into the drain. They wanted to put in a skimmer. We're going to skim the oil up, improve our yield. Well, it never got finished. And so in order to finish it, we had to do it on an expense budget. It never got finished still. About 5 years ago, I removed some of the equipment, but I kept part of the housing there as a reminder of not how you do projects. Another one is this one here. Somebody said, oh, I got a problem with this dirty water. I don't want it to put it down over here, so I'll attach it to that drain. And you could see that all was dirty water because they didn't no collaboration. That dirty water is oil bearing. That oil bearing water goes out to wastewater treatment. Anybody have a wastewater treatment plant? Okay, what's one of the worst things you can send out there? Things like oils. Okay, guess what? When you make when you kill your wastewater treatment, it stinks really bad. Even out in the boondocks, we would get complaints from 10 miles away. So you don't want to do that. The other thing we found out is when we put that stuff over to the feed mill to recover it, our yields went whoosh. So now when we see our CODs climbing, we start looking for yield loss because we know there's a relationship between them. So the bottom line is we had no rules, no process, no control. It was do whatever you wanted to do. So we knew that we had to come up with a process, and that process had 4 key elements that we had to, when you talk about change, you heard a lot so far from the two, and I'm sure Chair's going to say the same thing about communication, collaboration, consensus, and commitment. Consensus, we do consensus on getting the agreement to the scope of the job, not of whether we're going to do it or not. That's all based on justifications. So I know this is small, and I'm not intending you to see every little block, but one of those maintenance conferences I went through, they showed you that the best way to do any kind of flow process was to do it by swim lanes. And don't put people's names there, put titles. So we used to have almost a person in every one of those categories, and as we had to lay some people off, we just absorb those. So, Brendan and I do several, we both are the project administrators because we don't have one, but we still do the function. So the first part is our MOC process where we send this thing out. Anybody can turn one in. We prefer that the one that wants it, that comes up with the idea, gives us their name so we know who to go to and understand it. We then, engineering investigates this. We go ahead and collaborate. We may use the operators. We may use the team leaders. We may use outside contractors, consultants. We may go on the internet. We collaborate with all kind of different systems. Then the next part is once we get an agreement, and that's the consensus part, once we get an agreement, then we start doing the scope, and we try to use our internal labor to do the project, and then we do the justification, and then we implement the product. That's the blue section. And then one thing we added, and our president liked it so much, he convinced the board to do this for all of U.S. Sugar, is we start validating the projects. And so our board of directors every year will ask every unit to come up with 4 or 5 projects and have to justify it to the board of how their money is being spent and it's getting what we want out of it. And you can see that in some of these sections is that there's overlapping, like the big blue section there. That's in the implementation project. We're saying that isn't just engineering, that's everybody making sure it's going, you know, like we want it to. So we engage everybody, you know, into the process. Now when we're seeking approval on these projects, because this process really is loved by the quality people, everyone not only goes to all the people in engineering, us 3, but it goes to, everyone goes to the quality department, make sure we're not violating. Remember I told you before, things were being done in a silo. So everyone goes to the quality project to make sure that we're not doing anything that is going to affect quality, okay? We also, if it's may touch on safety, the safety person gets it. Environmental issues, the environmental person gets it. Operations, most of them get it there because once again, we don't want somebody to think that they're doing something over here that's going to make them $100 an hour, and down there they're losing $1,000 an hour, and that was happening before. So I'm looking at those 4 C's a different way. And that is, look at where we communicate. We started with formalizing this process. This process is on paper, and because it's in our FFSC system, our quality management system, every year we have an internal audit. Every year we have an external audit. We're audited during that time. And every year we're required to, any process that's in the system, we have to go ahead and update it. And so the other thing is every time we get new people, we train them to this new process. We also investigate where we're communicating with people. At the end of the project, we tell them when it's done. We collaborate during the implementation, during the investigation, during the commissioning. The thing you got to worry about there is both commissioning and consensus is you don't get into analysis paralysis. That is common to do. So you got to fight that all the time. So in consensus, we're looking for the recommendation, and if somebody says, no, I don't agree with this, we don't just blow them off. We try to get to where everybody can at least say, I can live with it. And then, of course, the commitment, which is a big thing, and it talks about justification, the project completion, where of course we tell them, hey, it's complete. We get them involved in the commissioning to make sure they say, yes, I'm happy, and then the validation. And one of the things that Dale said is about some projects, about taking a long time. One of the things that we're learning how to do is we have to replace, our PLC network was under 5, we're now going to Control Logics. We're trying to make that a 10-year project to stretch out the cost disadvantage to us. So what we do is we do one section, we take those old parts, save it to replenish the plant on PLC 5 until we run out of spare parts, then we do another section, and that's dragging that out. So you have to be good at that because you need to think in those terms too, because you can't, this is going to cost us like $5 million. We can't lay out $5 million at one time. We've got to stretch it out, and it's hard for us to get capital. So, how did this benefit us? Okay, so we went through and start tracking all of our projects, and we came up with 90% of the projects were meeting our validated or justification. We were able to validate those results, and we were doing it several ways. If it was a ROI type of project, we were looking at what we said it was going to cost us to do, and then what we said we were gonna, what the payback was. So if you went over a little on the cost, but still got the justification, you got credit for that. When we look at justifications, we looked at if this is a sustaining project, you got to maintain your business. Safety, environmental, quality, equipment broke. Guess how everybody would say, I need to get this project done. How? Oh, it's a safety thing. No, we want to know what regulation, did somebody get hurt? Is there a hazard report? You just can't say, yes, I need this. We don't do, we try to deal with none of the emotions, because everybody says, I got to have this. I just got to have it. It's going to save me a lot of money. Well, how? So in the ROI, we make them, even if it's expense, we make them give a justification. And that justification generally needs to be 2-year payback. Okay? As we built our maintenance program and got to we got to a proactive maintenance program, we went from 15 mechanics down to 9. We used to use 8 to 10 helpers during the summer. We're down to 4 now, and actually we do that because we need to train, internal people. It's hard. We're in the middle state. It's hard to get people that want to move to the middle unless they like that kind of lifestyle. If they're there, so the people that live in the community, we invest in them because they're not going to go anywhere because they like to do that. So we use, so as we could have probably cut more, but we said, hey, we can't cut our workforce that much, so we start doing projects. Where you talk about a cost savings is first of all, it's like half to 2/3 of what a contractor costs. Of course, we're not putting in there, the fees for running the projects, just their cost that's in SAP. And but the big benefit is where you get another savings is they do their own projects, so they're telling us if we thought of something wrong. They tell us whether they can't, it's in the wrong place. And so they're vested in making it successful. When it's successful, guess what? We don't have rework not only then, but it breaks down less down the road. The way we do our capital, we're given a certain amount of money. Okay, it doesn't matter how many good projects I say, it's a certain amount of money. And so we put 10% on every project. They allow us to use every penny that we can in that fiscal year, but they can't go a penny over. So we always, very seldom do we have any change orders, so we get all the contingency, and then we come up with different ways after we start implementing it and to lower the cost. The outside auditors, we're audited by DEP, auditors for PSM program. Our, once or twice a year, our insurance company comes out, and many different quality auditors and customers, and they love this practice because they see that we're having a way of making sure that we're making the decisions to affect the quality of the customer. Labor savings, not only in that, but the projects, have less rework. The other thing that's happening is we used to run 9 months. Now we're down to about 5 month, 5.5 month season. We're having a lot of turnover. So first of all, we try to, whenever we do a new project, we try to make sure we're improving on what we already have. And so and part of that improvement is the increased automation. And so that, we can replace help with the turnover, but it also is setting us up for the IIoT in that everything is going into the PLC now, so that we can capture the stuff from the PLC, and we're right now using Wonderware Historian to help us with that. Little to no rework. Once again, the people are installing it that have to live by it. Here's a big one, history of events. Back when we were doing this thing, we said, why didn't they do this? Why didn't we do that? We had no idea. Even though that was 20 years, I couldn't remember everything. I'm getting old too. I'm older than him. So now, I bet you over the past couple of years, at least 10 times a year, we will go back and look at our history. And we set it up just like our maintenance system. It's all functional locations, so it's easy to find the projects. And then, of course, we got the award for asset management this year, so we're thrilled about that. Not that, because it just inspired us. Terry's been to our plant before, and we said, let's go ahead and put it in. Terry thinks we got a good system. Auditors thinks we have a good system, and that's part of our Cinderella story, because we competed against 100 different people. 40% were multinational companies, so we're really thrilled and excited about that, and it's really kind of a validation of us. So, what was our lessons? Culture change, culture change, culture change. You're changing how, when we first did this, I used to have to carpool with this one guy, and he was the one that loved that he got to make the decisions on the projects. And boy, he hated it when he had to now get my permission. Oh, he hated that. And that's what you're going through. You're going through a change at all levels of the organization. Design versus implementation. We saw that, and I heard about Ford's plan. And sounds like a good plan, but my wife, 2 weeks ago, got in a car accident, destroyed her car, two blocks away from my house. And she was okay, but now we got to go. It was also 15 years old, so actually, thank you, God. So we started looking for a car. I went to several dealerships. I went to Ford. I went right outside the showroom. There's a bunch of cars. I got in 6 or 7 cars. I then went inside the showroom, and I got in 2 or 3 cars. 25 minutes later, I walked out. Do you know that whole 25 minutes there, not one salesman came up to me? No. Not one. So guess what? I don't go back there. You got to implement. You can have a great plan. You got to start with a great plan, but you have to implement. Process, continuing, auditing, and changed, and you can't let it stagnate. You gotta, keep growing and changing every day. The world is not standing still for us. Boy, you talk about, even we have a citrus conference every year, and we hear about how the drinking habits of millennials has changed from what, baby boomers and everything else on. So you got to worry about that. Training, communicate. And so many processes need to be driven from the top down. Not that they need to be the ones that are the advocates, but you need to know that you need to be on board. When we started SAP, the CEO got in front of the whole organization, said, the train is at the station. Decide whether you're going to get on or you're going to miss it. I used to ask people to drink orange juice. Well, Dr. Oz has convinced you all that it's not good for you, so I'm not going to get into arguments whether it is good for you or not. So I don't care if you drink it. I just want you to buy it.